Let's welcome in NFL and CBS sideline reporter. He, of course, is Evan Washburn, who's here with us on 365 Sports. And you look warm, my friend, after being in chilly Denver last week where you were on the sideline looking like Frosty the Snowman. How are you?
I'm better. Yeah, no, that was an interesting day from a weather perspective, hair perspective. But I don't feel warm, Zach. I'm coming to you from Baltimore, as you know, and we're just stuck in this Arctic chill. And the snow hit home here over the weekend while I was in Denver. And all I've been doing, it feels like the last few days, is digging us out. And it includes chopping up blocks of ice. So, yeah, this is a nice respite to just hang in here with you and talk some ball and warm up for a little bit.
I always pride our show of being ahead of the story. And I remember we had you on like 2 months ago when we were talking about your hair process, and you go, oh, I try to avoid the hat. I had to go with the hat when you were in Jacksonville when it was raining or something like that earlier in the season. No hat, though, in the snow in Denver when that snow's coming down. Why didn't you cave? Why wasn't Evan Washburn weak? And why did you elect to just muscle through and not go with the hat?
It's a great example of just how dramatically the weather shifted, because when we arrived at the stadium at about 9 a.m., it was brisk. It was sunny. It felt like one of those winter Denver days where you benefit from the sunlight, the lack of wind, and it might read as 20 degrees, 15 degrees, but the feels like is manageable. So at that point, no need for a hat. That was really the case all the way through and into the second quarter, even as it started to cloud up. At halftime, went in, got a cup of coffee, hung out, warmed up a bit, and then came out to start the second half. And that's when the flurries started to come down. But it wasn't, again, sort of this like, I'm freezing. I got to find every way to cover every ounce of my body. And then, yes, by the middle of the third quarter, things had shifted to the point where it was coming down fast. The wind was biting. But I think I was so maybe adrenalized by the fact that this was an AFC Championship game and we're following things. And at one point, prior to me being on camera, somebody kind of gave me a funny look with the Patriots sideline, somebody I know, and I kind of said, what's going on? It's like, well, your hair is frozen. And so that kind of led me to think, all right, it's probably a pretty funny visual. And then I kind of forgot about it. And again, I wasn't that cold. And then we ended up doing the report because the weather becomes such a storyline. And the best part, Zach, was the camera operator, this guy, Jason, who I've worked with a bunch, awesome, really talented dude. He kind of had this look as we were about to go on camera, and he was shooting my report there. And I kind of gave him this look like, do I look a little ridiculous right now? And he chuckled. And that's when I figured it was going to be a thing, and it became a thing.
It was a big meme. It was. You could make a case. It was the highlight of the AFC Championship game.
If you want to make that case, I will endorse that case. I'm not going to fight you on it.
What were your text messages like with friends and family? Did they kind of like have fun at it and send all the memes that are out there? Do they show you all that stuff? Because whenever I'm on like a Reddit thread or someone saying crazy things about me, I have a few friends that they love to just be like, hey, did you see this one? Did you see that one? Did that happen with you?
No, it definitely blew up. And look, you get to do a job like this, you're going to have people reach out to you, and it's fun, and I appreciate it. But this one definitely hit a different level in terms of some of the people that reached out that I hadn't heard from in a while. And I will say my favorite, and I haven't said this yet to anybody because it hasn't really come up, but my college lacrosse coach, Bob Schillinglaw, texted me, and we don't text very often. And all he said was, is it colder there than it was in a January practice out on Willow Stadium in Newark, Delaware, where we would practice all January in the dead of winter? And I confidently said, nothing is colder than a January lacrosse practice in Newark. So that was probably my most fun text that I got.
Weren't you at Delaware at the same time as Joe Flacco, right?
I was, yeah. So he transferred in while we were already there. We were the same class, I think. He graduated in 2007, or at least left to go to the draft in 2007. I took an extra year and was in 2008. So, yeah, we crossed paths for at least 2 or 3 years.
So we need your reaction because this is a big day for Joe Flacco. He is now going to his first ever Pro Bowl. So we talk about your hair. We talk about Joe Flacco. We get to the big storylines here. What is the Evan Washburn take on Joe Flacco finally get into a Pro Bowl?
Anything that happens positively for Joe Flacco, I'm a huge fan of. I love the guy. I've enjoyed kind of seeing this new second, third act of his career. I thought he was an extremely effective, high end quarterback for all those years in Baltimore. The run he went on for Super Bowl was unlike any we'd really seen.
Elite.
I thought he didn't get enough credit for being as solid and consistent as he was, because I think people always, to be fair, because his ceiling was so high, expected him to enter the territory of Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, and Tom Brady. And I think he knocked on that door a couple times, but he was what he was, and he was pretty reserved. And then, for whatever reason, once he left Baltimore and had sort of his sojourn through Denver and Philly and New York, and then obviously when he had that run with the Browns, everybody got to see the personality that I think a lot of us knew existed, which is he's one of the most authentic and relatable guys. And it only makes sense that in a year where Sam Darnold's competing against Mike Vrabel and the Patriots in the Super Bowl, that your Pro Bowl quarterbacks are going to be Shedeur Sanders and Joe Flacco. This is the upside down season by every metric.
And it's crazy. Me being a Patriot fan, if you just looked at it from the quarterbacks the Pats went up against in the playoffs of the AFC, Flacco was the one I was the most intimidated by. He always played well up against the Patriots.
No doubt. I was part of like the local coverage at that point, working at Comcast Sportsnet. So I was at the Billy Cundiff game. I was at the one that they won the next year, and it was one of those things where that team always felt like they could go into New England and not be pushed around, and they wouldn't get beat by the Banners, which is always a saying you would hear from both people in New England, but also more importantly, the road teams when they'd walk into that stadium during the heart of the Brady era and the Bill era, that they'd look up and they'd see those banners and they'd be losing before they kicked that thing off to start the game.
Evan Washburn here with us, NFL on CBS. The Vikings today, they have parted ways with Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. Were you surprised by that one?
It definitely caught me off guard. I mean, I guess when you look at it based off of what happened, you hope that it's not directly in result of Sam Darnold having this Super Bowl run, and I'm sure we'll learn more, or maybe I'll learn more here in the next few hours and days. But I always find the GM firings and timing of it confusing, because this is their season. This is the season in which that position is most important. And to not only let someone go, that's one thing, but to not have somebody coming in to make the decisions throughout the draft process, and more importantly, in free agency and in the draft, to set the team up, and you have an interim, and then you're going to hire somebody afterwards to then run a roster that they didn't build. I don't know. That timing and workflow does not make sense to me.
Yeah, and I saw that Diana Rossini, she was talking about like some of the reasonings why this happened, and she talked about Kwesi drafting, also not being able to retain Daniel Jones. But then she had a report out there that Kwesi was the one that opposed Aaron Rodgers. So like I see those things, and who knows what actually is true. Diana does a good job. And I said to myself, like, is Aaron Rodgers still in play for Minnesota this year, especially with the uncertainty of JJ McCarthy and what he wasn't able to do a year ago?
Of all the things you rattled off, though, the Aaron Rodgers one would be the least sort of a blemish on his resume. I mean, Aaron was solid this year in Pittsburgh, and I thought gave them a chance to win and more opportunities than probably they'd had from that position in years past. But from the Daniel Jones situation, that was obvious. He wanted a chance to start, and he got one in Indianapolis. They drafted J.J. McCarthy. If that's what you're going to be critical of the GM on, and I would imagine that Kevin O'Connell had a pretty big say in drafting J.J. McCarthy, then that would be your biggest vulnerability in terms of decision making. And yeah, Sam Darnold, were you going to pay him what appeared to be, at least contractually on paper, $100 million to be what you would hope to be as a backup to the guy you drafted in the first round, and McCarthy? I don't know. I don't think Aaron Rodgers, I wouldn't imagine he's in play for Minnesota. I would think if he's coming back, he's going to come play for Mike McCarthy in a place where he clearly had a really enjoyable time and seemed super comfortable.
I do think it'd be cool because I don't know what the Steelers' plan is at quarterback. It's like they're not bad enough to go get a quarterback early on. You could look into one maybe later into the draft. It doesn't seem like there's a huge name out there that they could go get. especially with how a lot of people think that relationship ended with Rodgers and McCarthy. It would be nice in what could be Rodgers' final season to see them reunite out in Pittsburgh.
It makes too much sense. I agree. I think that Pittsburgh would benefit from investigating everything they have in Will Howard. I know that people seem to think that there's something there to work with, and then using the draft as a chance to just increase your odds. You're right; they're not drafting in a position that allows them to go get somebody at the top. But from everything I'm sort of consuming when it comes to the early draft process, this isn't a deep, rich quarterback draft, but you might as well take somebody near the top of the one of those early rounds to just kind of add and throw in the mix. But it to me seems like when you hire Mike McCarthy with his history, whatever it might be with Aaron Rodgers and with the guys that you have on that roster, we haven't heard of any retirement plans for Cam Hayward, and TJ Watt's still under contract for a number of years, and you still have a high-end group that's highly compensated. You'd probably want to maximize it as best you can.
And it's a division that has a lot of questions now, because when you look at this division, all right, the Bengals, can they ever stay healthy? The Browns, I know they have a good defense, but offensively, they're a mess. The Ravens, I don't know what they're like. Lamar's there. He's great, but I don't know what they're going to look like with Jesse Minter, even though I believe in the hire. It's like this AFC North, it used to be such a strong division. There's a lot of question marks now in this North.
It is an odd time. It seems to be in transition right now. It's funny. I was joking with somebody that the AFC North has now seemingly, from a interest in kind of like the way we view it standpoint, AFC South has trumped them in a lot of ways, just because of just the storylines in and around that group. They've got to some degree established quarterbacks and teams that are competing in playoffs. And then the North is one where, yeah, you have a lot of question marks. But I do think that Baltimore will bounce back. I think if they can figure out a way to stay healthy, and I think Minter will provide them some juice. And to me, it looks like they looked at their situation as not a complete turn upside down, rework, rebuild, or restructure of our culture and our building. We think we have the opportunity to get a younger, fresh voice and somebody who is going to take this defense to another level. And then hopefully they can pair Lamar with a offensive coordinator that they can mesh in a way that will get him back to his MVP level. But you're right. It's just going to be odd going on a training camp tour and then eventually doing games in the division that our crew seems to be in every other week, and be dealing with so many new faces from a coaching staff perspective.
Yeah, and you look at the Ravens, I think them hiring Jesse Minter, and John Harbaugh's a really damn good coach. I thought it was time to move on. I get the decision, but it's finding that Mike Macdonald, who obviously the Ravens know very well, and Minter knows the Harbaugh family. It's been associated with all the similar stops as Macdonald. That's what I kind of interpreted the Minter hire. It's finding the next Mike Macdonald.
And I'll be honest, Zach, it did surprise me. I was expecting them to go with a fresh voice in terms of, or at least a fresh voice when it comes to a resume that doesn't have deep ties to the organization. And Jesse Minter, I mean, he is as aligned with the Harbaughs from his dad and Jim and John, and then having spent a number of years in Baltimore. And then once it happened, and I know people had speculated that was the plan all along, I guess I was just kind of standing on the outside of it, but it now makes sense, or at least I can understand the decision, where Eric DeCosta and Steve Bisciotti and Sashi Brown, their president, probably came together. Ozzy's still very much in the mix, and said, all right, we don't need somebody to come in here and completely flip our building upside down, like what John is doing in New York, for example. We feel like we have a lot of what we need in place to take that next step to a Super Bowl, but we need a new vision from a coaching staff perspective, and most importantly, the head coach, because you're even seeing some of the assistants being retained. So that to me speaks to, they're looking at this more like a tweak, and they felt like Jesse Minter was the right guy for that. And we'll find out, because he's not necessarily young. He's 43 years old, but he's unproven on this level and this stage, because he's being gifted a roster that is still considered one of the more talented in the NFL. He has arguably the best defensive player in the league, a former, defensive player of the year candidate in Roquan Smith, Kyle Hamilton, who I think is the ultimate chess piece and just weapon on that side of the ball. And then Lamar Jackson, whose ceiling is a 2-time MVP that arguably should have 3.
When you look at Buffalo and the aftermath, you move off of McDermott, you promote Joe Brady. That end result to you is what?
Very similar, just on the other side of the ball to what Baltimore did with Jesse Minter, and Joe happened to be in the building, I think. And it's starting to come out a little bit more that they felt like they just needed somebody to change the energy in that building. And I really like Sean McDermott, and I hope he finds a home, whether it's this year in this hiring cycle or next year, because I do think he's a really good football coach. But everybody does it differently. And Sean's a pretty serious dude. And he's got that wrestling background, and we all know wrestlers. They have a certain way about them, and they carry themselves a certain way, and they kind of like everybody else to be in that mindset. And I think it would appear that that maybe created not a tension in a bad way, but like everybody was gripping it pretty tight in that building. And I think they're looking for a different energy now that they've just been beat up by success in a lot of ways, which I think gets under described or under characterized in terms of the challenge that these teams face. When you're at knocking at that door every year, whether it's in the divisional round or the conference championship, and you can't break it down, it's almost worse than had you had a couple seasons we were below 500 and you just kind of re-racked your brain. And that's why I think the Kansas City season might actually work in this group's favor. I mean, it kind of is a reset, a refresher. The Mahomes injury is obviously going to delay that a little bit, and that's unfortunate. But circling back to Joe Brady, I think he comes in there, and I don't know if you've ever talked to him. Fun dude, just like obviously brilliant offensive mind. He's great at connecting to people. The only question I would have is just there's going to be a lot more on his plate, and you never know until you see him do it. And that's the same thing with Jesse Minter. Same thing now with Joe Brady. They're going to be, they're considered the best on their side of the ball in a lot of ways, calling defenses, calling offenses, being young, connecting with their players. But now they got 53 plus an entire building. And the marketing guys coming in their office saying, hey, what cleats are we wearing? Or how do you want to do the signage here? Or how do you want the Jumbotron to, like, there's so much to that stuff that can, I think, weigh you down. So until you're doing it, you don't know how it's going to impact some of the other things you got to do on a day-to-day basis.
Getting back to Buffalo, wrap it up with Evan Washburn, NFL and CBS. I think it's a great point because yes, the Chiefs would rather be in the playoffs going to try to win another Super Bowl. But I do think now people are going to walk into this year questioning Kansas City, which hasn't happened in a while. You look at Arch Manning, even in college, he had everything going into this year, then didn't play well. Some of the attention's going to be off of him. The Bills being around him a few times this year. I was there in the locker room after they lost to Atlanta on Monday Night Football. And you just saw like a blank stare from Josh where it just felt different this year. And then afterwards, Terry Pagula, and I get it, it's a tough loss in the playoffs, and Josh finally didn't play well in a postseason game, but you got the owner of the team saying something to you, and Josh is just like, how did we not get there in a year where there's no Mahomes, there's no Lamar, there's no Burrow? And he didn't even respond to Terry Pagula as he said it. I'm fascinated to see how they respond off another just devastating, terrible defeat.
And I think they'll respond with just a new, and I keep using the word, but I think it's going to create a new energy. They didn't have the Kansas City situation. I do think expectations will be a bit more tempered for Buffalo because you kind of started to feel it at the end of the regular season when it came to just their roster makeup, the wide receiver position, well documented, just not having enough game changers. How they handled draft and free agency, I think, may dictate how we feel about this team going into next year. And the reality, and maybe most important thing, Zach, is New England has already created the spotlight to be directly on them going into next year. And if they win the Super Bowl, that's only taken to, extra wattage, if you will, because now it's no longer Buffalo's division, and the expectations and all the attention and all the training camp, every live shot, all the national folk, whether it's, how they're, it's all going to be on New England again. It's going to be like the old days to some degree. And I think that's great for Joe and Josh and everybody there in Buffalo. They can go back to being a little bit of the underdog, even though he's the best player in the NFL, in my opinion, the underdog and kind of sneak up and not so much be the hunted. I think New England's success will actually work in Buffalo's favor going into next year.
So, last thing I'll ask you, you're great at telling storylines, NFL and CBS. When you look at the Super Bowl with the Patriots and the Seahawks, what's the storyline that stands out to you the most?
Whew. I mean, that's the fun part about these games. There's so many. I mean, if I had to pick the biggest storyline, it's Sam Darnold. I mean, it's like a sports movie, just in terms of, I mean, you can see the scenes, you can see the trailer. It's him starting at USC and playing on those big stages, and then being drafted and holding up the jersey, and then flash frame to I'm seeing Ghost against New England on Monday Night Football, to him in a Carolina Panthers uniform, to him in a San Francisco 49ers uniform, to him having his season in Minnesota where he's all of a sudden playing at an MVP level, only in the final 2 seasons to be kind of reset back to this guy nobody believed in, to now being signed in the offseason to Seattle, but to a deal that's kind of one of those ones where they can get out after this year if they want to, or next year. And then the moments throughout this year, and then really that backwards pass on Thursday Night Football that ends up being a fumble. I can't even remember exactly what it was. They win that game, and just couple that with the NFC Championship game where he finally played like just one of the best of his career. If this guy wins a Super Bowl, it'll be a fun, sports doc, whatever it wants to be. And if you've ever crossed paths with Sam Darnold, he is everything you want from a pro athlete. He's a lot like Josh Allen. You can see why they're buddies. Super down to earth, just a really good guy. And that's why I think everybody's rooting for him right now.
If I could make one recommendation, little career advice for you, even make you some more money, I think you should put the photo of you on the sideline freezing on a T-shirt and try to sell it. I think people would buy it.
That's so just me, or the one where it's me like matched up with like Martin Short? I saw that one a lot. I think JJ Watt was the originator of that one. But you just me with the frozen hair.
Yeah, I think it would be good.
No caption necessary.
No cap. Just get the shirt. I would rock a Evan Washburn freezing hair kind of shirt. I think the sales would do very well.
Look, man, you are much more tapped into what is cool or what maybe would grab attention from a merch standpoint.
Yeah.
So I'll look into it. I'll talk to my people, and by people I mean my wife, because maybe she'll say that's a horrible idea and
she
I don't
would
want
get
anything
one
to do with it. But yeah, no, it'd be fun. Hey man, I'm happy that we could have that moment in that game, because I've been chasing a hair product deal for the last 12 years doing this job. It's amazing. I've joked that I think I could go on any show or game and say some of the wildly silly, stupid things, and only people would mention my hair. So I feel like this might be the final kind of nail and whatever it needs to be to make it happen, but we'll see.
I am just shocked that you don't have a hair product.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Shocked. If you are listening to this and
anyone out there
or whatever,
business is open
for a sponsorship. One last thing. I know I've said it like 10,000 times, but truly the last one here. The crew this year, fun broadcast. It felt like an A-team with Ian and JJ and you. Looking back at it, just how do you kind of look back at the crew that you were with this year?
Unbelievable. And I've enjoyed really all previous, 11 years, starting with Greg Gumbel and Trent Green, and then a number of years with Dan and Ian, Dan Fouts, and then Charles was great as well. And I was talking to somebody about it recently, Zach. I think what made this year special is it caught the three of us specifically, and then I have to shout out Ken Mack and Suzanne Smith in the truck, because they're as big a part of this as anybody. But I think it caught the three of us at a great time in our careers, and kind of in, I can speak for myself knowing that at this point, I know how I want to do the job. I have complete confidence in doing it, and it's fun. It's loose. The nerves or whatever they're going to be, just excitement. And Ian is, to me, at the pinnacle of the profession, especially just calling games. And then you bring in this guy in JJ Watt, who is just a mega celebrity sports icon for what he did on the playing field. But what we learned, and I think what people learned on air every Sunday, but we got to experience the other 6 days of the week, is that he is all in on doing it and doing it at the highest level. And you got to see and got a window into why he was so great as a player. Yes, there's the physical gifts of being a large human being, but it's the mental stuff and the way that he prepared, but the way he also listened and engaged in, like, enough about media and sports production. It's an ultimate team game. If you don't know or have a command or understanding of what everybody's job is, then to me, you're kind of not doing the job the right way. Yeah, you can call what's happening on third down, or you can identify a blitz, or if you're doing play-by-play, you can make a big call on touchdown, or if you're doing sidelines, you can ask a good question or have a good injury report. But the best, in my opinion, are the people that have their hands and understanding of what everybody's doing, from the camera operators to the tape people in the truck to the producer, director, AD, BA, all these different roles. And the thing that impressed me about JJ is he came in and he soaked it all in, and he was ready for it. And then we just ended up having so much fun on air because we were all so prepared and dialed in the other 6 days of the week that I would often say Sunday from 1 to 3 or 4 to 7 was the easiest time. That was the time to just cut it loose. So I'm jacked. I'm ready to do next year. It was one of those years too that it went by way too fast.
And I'll tell you, I was surprised that JJ went into the booth because he was doing the NFL Today. It's a huge platform, comfy job, right? Easier than what he's doing now. What was that first thought when they came to you and said, "Oh, JJ's going to be paired up with Ian and you"?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get much on the background as to how he got there, but I think once he got there, he realized what people maybe don't understand, that just consume it as they should. They're watching, they don't really care. I think sometimes we get a little bit too inside baseball of like thinking fans really care that much about what announcers are doing or who's doing the game or what that. But if you're into the sport, whether it's as an analyst or a play, like, there's nothing better than games. Yeah, it's a bit more of a grind. You got the travel aspect and all the prep that goes into the games, the meetings upon meetings to get ready for a game. But man, it replicates the environment, at least, of what it was like to play, because you're in the stadium, you're in the arena, as a lot of these guys like to say. And I think that's intoxicating. And then the biggest thing, Zach, and you know this, but you can't plan for what you're going to have to do in a game. And that creates this nervous tension and energy, which that's what I love most about it. I get to do some studio stuff in here and there. I love doing features. I love doing sit down interviews, but all that stuff I can kind of plan for. And I know what I'm going to ask, and I know where I need to be, and I know what I need to say. A game is you've done as much work as you think you need to from Monday through Saturday night into Sunday morning. And then the game unfolds and you're judged off your ability to react. And that's a lot what it's like to play a sport where if you're playing basketball, you're doing all your work, you're shooting hoops, you're shooting free throws. But then once the game starts, it's how do you react? And that's where you're really tested. And I think that's where, for some of these former players, they get a taste of the game and they go, whoa, this hits a little bit of that same nerve that I used to get. Not to the level, I imagine, anywhere close, because that's on a different stratosphere probably. But it can scratch that itch, if you will.
He's Evan Washburn, NFL and CBS. Evan, always appreciate the time. Thanks for the long conversation today.
You got it, buddy. See ya.